Well, guys, I think it's time we have the talk. You know, the talk about the birds and the bees, especially with all the honey that needs to be added to all the tea around dating today. Not to mention the disturbing rise of STIs, unrealistic expectations in sex due to the access of pornography and the damage it does to the intimate brain when consumed too much. Because you see, when two people love each other, or wait, I guess when one person matches with another after hours of swiping and filtering through a multitude of profiles, they meet and their bodies take over to decide if they're pheromonally matched. And maybe your body gives it the go ahead, but then you have to bypass all that childhood trauma, insecure attachment attitudes, and cognitive biases produced by unconscious fears that you don't even know that are at play to decide if they're worth all that work. And maybe they are. But then you think about all those profiles that you could be missing out on. Or, oh my God, what if they don't think that you're worth it? It sounds so exhausting. But you don't really want to cut them off just yet. So you keep them at a distance as you continue to pursue other potential mates, all the while pushing down any hope of true love actually manifesting, despite your brain thinking that's the end goal, until your amygdala kicks in and says, not today, vasopressin, and you take off for the hill full of underlying shame without a peep. If there's any part of that scenario that struck a chord with you, whether you are that person or have dealt with someone like that, sit down and listen, because I'm going to break this down piece by piece through the lens of interpersonal neurobiology, social psychology, patterns throughout history, and good old-fashioned sex ed, while making sure you're keeping yourself protected, not just your heart and sanity, but also that pleasurable area below the belt. You may not have heard of interpersonal neurobiology before, and guess what? Neither did I. Till I started researching this lesson. Imagine my giddiness when I came across a 20-hour book on this recent field and learned it combines research from anthropology, biology, cognitive and computer science, linguistics, neuroscience, math, psychology, sociology, physics, and even more to study and understand how relationships affect the brain, our consciousness, and bodies. I do love it when independent fields of science play nice together. Hopefully soon we can add some spiritual practices to the mix, but all in due time. So this lesson has been a bit delayed because I needed to listen to the entire book before I could write this, not to mention all of the studies, revisiting some of the other books I've read in the past, including the penis book by Dr. Aaron Spitz, which for someone that lacks one of those, I found quite fascinating. And as always, I will make the disclaimer to those who may not have watched my lessons previously, I am not a therapist or have a doctor in front of my name. But what I do have is an extreme amount of knowledge that sits in this very complicated brain, eager to be shared, not only through education, but through plenty of experience. I do this as it's deemed part of my purpose, to teach others how to foster healthy and loving intimate connections, despite having one of my own. But you know what they say, those that can't do, teach. Okay, I'm kidding, right? Like, it's not that I'm not able to have or find a healthy relationship. I just tend to find challenging cases. Some succeed and some don't. But with each one, I've learned a lot. And it's driven me each and every time to find the unanswered whys, which has in turn led me to this channel and enough confidence to say I believe that things will be changing soon for me in my love life, at least, well, according to my astrological charts. I will admit, I'm a bit skeptical, however, as I have ventured back onto the dating scene after clearing out my last encounter that I've discussed in previous lessons that I call A. I allowed myself enough time and space to learn and heal from that instead of trying to find some replacement to lick my wounds. But I'm also comfortable being alone. And even though I enjoy loving another, both physically and emotionally, I am not driven by shame or fear that haunts moments of silence. I would rather take the time to not bring in the past with baggage with the right person than to provide false hope to somebody or use somebody to validate myself. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. Of course, trust me, I take time because I need it. Heartbreak is hard for an empath, and it's disappointing to always be able to see the potential of what could be, have it like within reach, but not be able to achieve it because the other person isn't strong enough or too scared to put in the work. And as for A, well, he has not grown whatsoever, despite all my efforts, as the tea was also spilled on him rather recently. But this is not surprising. In fact, I would have been more surprised to hear that he had changed. When faced with challenges in relationship, it's often easier to find a replacement than to put in the work required for personal growth, especially with the abundance of options available at our fingertips. I believe there are two types of people when it comes to relationships. Those with a fixed mindset, stuck in fear and trauma, finding growth exhausting or lacking the courage to pursue it, and those with a growth mindset who thrive on challenges and use them as opportunities to become better human beings. One could possibly relate this to the secure and insecure attachment style, but it's so much more than that. Fixed mindset is not a positive quality, as it hinders personal development and keeps people trapped in their trauma and fear. This is why it's often seen in those that have high narcissistic or antisocial traits. Some individuals are so deeply affected by their childhood fears that despite my idealistic belief that love conquers all, it seems that fear is the ultimate motivator that overrides everything else. It takes less than a millisecond for an event to impact our brain for the rest of our lives, often without us even realizing the extent to which our subconscious mind triggers us daily. Removing that fear takes a lot longer, and facing it head on requires resilience and determination. But sometimes that fear is simply just too overwhelming. So for someone like A, who's good looking and has a desirable title to his name, it's easy to get dates without putting in much effort. Online dating allows him to get temporary validation and make him feel better about himself, which is important for someone with a fixed mindset rooted in perpetual shame and feelings of inadequacy. Those types don't want to grow because they don't see the value in it or feel worthy of it. He holds on to his past trauma and a distorted view of what happened with his ex as an excuse for his poor behavior. He allows it to define him, to own him, and suffocate any chance at true happiness. For individuals like A, some of the same chemicals are at play that drive one to fall in love, but they may carry some imbalance or a mutation in their oxytocin receptor that makes them less susceptible to love, but possess the desire to seek the reward of swiping right and moving on to the next person, getting that fix of validation. Now, they may at times crave that intimacy and touch and think they want a commitment, but pornography can easily replace those needs, especially with the rise of virtual reality pornography, which has a profound impact on the intimate brain and their ability to connect. Furthermore, we are constrained by societal trends, religion, and group conformity that dictates how we should date and what is considered appropriate. Dating, or courting as it once was called, has always been influenced by society, particularly when laws become involved. So let's begin this talk by taking a stroll through history to understand how we went from a time when a man was required to marry a woman he dared touch without a chaperone to an era where sex has become so casual that it has potentially led to the resurgence of a nearly eradicated STI. But before I start, I must make one more disclaimer. As a straight female, this lesson is primarily geared towards heterosexual dating and sex. I incorporate my life experiences into my lessons, and a same-sex relationship is not something I have personally experienced. That's not to say that I would be opposed to it or that I have some kind of problem with it. It's just that my body and brain just happen to prefer men, even though I do sometimes question why. Now, it's important to note that there is unfortunately a lack of research on same-sex or non-binary relationships and dating. When it comes to history, the classification of homosexuality as a label is actually relatively newer. Being homosexual is not a new concept. It has been a part of human nature since our creation, despite what some religious beliefs may suggest. If you understand human history, you will know that prior to the rise of Christianity, homosexuality was more accepted than not. As mentioned earlier, sex and dating has always been influenced by society, and what society deems right is often determined by those in position of authority. The personal beliefs of a few individual people can easily sway the opinion of the masses. But let's be blunt. I mean, honestly, why is it anyone's fucking business in the first place? Like, who gives a shit who loves who or who bangs who, as long as it's done with consent and those that are old enough to give consent? If you are one of those people that have a problem with homosexuality, you should ask yourself, then why are our bodies actually made for it? A man can experience incredible orgasms through prostate stimulation, which is accessible through the anus. A woman doesn't need penetration to enjoy a pleasurable climatic state. The only true purpose of heterosexuality from a biological standpoint is to pop out a baby. But if you are interested in learning more about the history of homosexuality and its prevalence throughout history, I highly recommend the book Been There, Done That by Rachel Feltman, which will be linked below in the notes. I'm only making this disclaimer to avoid sounding presumptuous or suggesting that everyone's experiences are the same. I am sure a lot of this will cross over no matter what you label yourself as, because it is my goal to provide valuable insights and information on dating, love, and sex, while acknowledging, though, that there is a diversity in human sexuality and relationship in today's crazy, modern, fucked up world. Dating has always been a little crazy. I recently binge watched Bridgerton for the first time on Netflix, and I couldn't help wonder, like, did that actually happen? Was there like this dating season where women were put on a marriage market? Oh, yes. Yes, there was. Bridgerton is set in the Regency era of the 19th century, early England, the years between 1811 and 1820. It offers a somewhat accurate portrayal of dating in high society, with some added drama, of course, and a modern twist. The show features scandals exposed by gossip writers whose identity is unknown through printed pamphlets. Much like the infamous Lady Whistledown's Society papers, real-life pamphlets in the Regency era played a crucial role in shaping public opinion and influencing the social standing and fortunes of individuals. This sometimes led to legal actions for libel and slander as people sought to protect their reputations. It's kind of funny, though, how 600 years later, we're doing the exact same thing, except through social media. The concept of dating or romantic love prior to marriage didn't really emerge until the Middle Ages. That's not to say ancient Greece or Rome didn't have their own courtship rituals, such as gift giving, chaperone meetings, and even love letters. They even had a ritual that involved a young man throwing an apple at a woman he admired. If she caught it, it indicated her acceptance of his affection, and just like that, they were married. I have to imagine, though, this must have been super awkward for those that caught it, like to block getting smacked in the face with a hurling apple. However, the idea of forming a bond based on romance or love without getting hitched was largely unheard of, and most marriages were arranged. However, the idea of forming a bond based on romance or love without getting hitched was largely unheard of, and most marriages were arranged. The Renaissance era helped further the concept of marriage for love with its abundance of romantic literature. Take, for example, Shakespeare's famous Sonnet 18, which begins with the iconic line, "Shall I compare these to a summer day?" But let's not forget that Romeo and Juliet only dated for 3 days before they decided to take their own lives, a reminder that fiction often takes liberties with reality. The 19th century, as dramatically portrayed in Bridgerton, is probably the earliest time one could relate to the whole concept of dating. But not so much as we know it today. I mean, it wasn't like you could swipe left or right on your dance card and move on to the next prospect. Often it was one and done, and you didn't get to spend time with your actual date, and never ever alone. So the concept of dating as we know it today only really began about 100 years ago with the invention of the automobile and the rise of autonomy for women. It was around the 1920s when the concept of dating as a social activity emerged, particularly in Western culture, moving away from the formal courtship rituals. After World War II, there was a return of traditional family values, but with an increased emphasis on romantic love and companionship in marriage, thus the birthing of the baby boomers. But even then, the concept of serial dating wasn't widespread, and most people only had a few partners before deciding on the one. The 60s and 70s saw an increase in partnerships, especially sexual ones, promoting greater sexual freedom and the idea of love as a personal choice. This is also the time when pornography came more on the scene, no pun intended. Of course, racy pics weren't a new thing. I mean, even in Mesopotamia had sex scenes etched on clay, but the 70s are considered the golden age of porn, with the mainstream porno Deep Throat hitting the scene and becoming a cultural sensation. This era also marked the beginning of a significant rise in cohabitation before marriage, leading to longer relationships with multiple partners before committing to marriage. As you can see, the concept of dating and relationships has evolved throughout history and very quickly in the last 100 years, shaped by changing societal norms, technological advancements, and cultural movements. Each era has left a mark on the way we approach love and partnerships, but perhaps no development has had a greater impact on modern dating than the rise of the internet and online dating platforms. Online dating began just 30 years ago, but it has quickly become the dominant force in the dating scene. The 2010s saw the debut of dating apps like Grindr in 2009 and Tinder in 2012, which still reigns supreme today. As of March 2024, there are over 1,500 dating apps and websites worldwide, catering to a wide range of preferences and niches. This abundance of choice has transformed dating into a form of consumerism, making it more akin to shopping for a date than actually searching for love. While dating apps have opened new opportunities for connection, they have also introduced a host of challenges that our brains are just not equipped to handle. This includes online scammers, ghosting, infidelity, option overload, narcissism, antisocial behavior, and even sexual assault. Despite these concerns, the online dating industry continues to grow, with revenues reaching billions of dollars. As corporate greed drives the pursuit of profits, the focus on the benefits to our health and well-being will most likely be overshadowed. But for singles, the question remains, like, do the benefits of dating apps outweigh the challenges? Can you find love via swiping? Well, it depends on who you ask and if that's even really their true goal. Recent surveys on these topics have yielded varying results. One consistent statistic is that about half of Americans have used dating apps at least once. Considering that approximately 30% of the US population is single, meaning not in a committed relationship, according to the Pew Research Center in 2022, and 30% of that group is 50 or older, the finding makes sense. Because if you take it in that context, it's safe to say that nearly all single people have used a dating app at some point. But which one? Now, as I mentioned, Tinder consistently ranks #1 across all surveys, while Bumble, Plenty of Fish, and Match compete for second place. Hinge, OkCupid, eHarmony, Coffee Meet Bagels, Her, and Grindr follow suit in varying rankings. Personally, I have tried Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, and Coffee Meets Bagel. Honestly, I find Tinder, though, extremely annoying, with the constant pop-ups encouraging signups and then some random pricing for different features. And I'm also not a fan of the comic-like nope feature that makes it feel more like a game, although I do appreciate the attempts to filter out fake profiles. I briefly tried Bumble and Coffee Meets Bagel a long time ago, but I didn't really find it particularly engaging. Hinge is most likely my go-to app, despite the noticeable uptick in AI-generated profiles that the platform struggles to detect. It kind of feels like there's about 3 fake profiles for every genuine one. How can you tell? Well, their photos may differ, but the overall pose or facial expressions are usually the same. These profiles often feature extremely good-looking individuals who are not verified, usually foreign, seeking a life partner, and typically you have to like them first. I'll admit, I was fooled once. But within the first couple of messages, like the person wanted to connect on WhatsApp, and while WhatsApp is used for some people, it's mostly used for distance or foreign communication, and this was supposed to be a local person. I just felt it was immediately a red flag. Now, I've never paid for a dating app, not to say that you shouldn't, but I just don't believe I ever will, because I feel that if I am meant to meet someone, the universe is going to find a way to make it happen, and it's not going to require a fee. The most popular apps also vary by age and state. In North Carolina, for example, Tinder and Christian Mingle are on top of the list. The next question is, well, do the apps work? The answer likely depends on what it is, again, that you're looking for. Overall satisfaction with apps varies greatly. One survey has stated that only 10% of women and 13% of men are satisfied with their experience, while another one reports satisfaction rates up to 52%. The reason for these skewed results may lie, though, in who is being asked and how. Different people have different expectations, and some may be unsatisfied with dating in general, not just apps. As for success rates, Pew Research found that 10% of married people in 2022 met their spouse through a dating app. However, Bumble's own survey claims that 39% of those who have been on the platform have found a spouse or a long-term relationship. Another survey stated that 72% of dating app users have found a long-term relationship. I am very skeptical, though, of that high success rate, and I would probably want to check the data on the actual survey, given the prevailing narrative surrounding dating apps in the news and on social media. Not to mention 40% of Americans say it's harder now to date than it was a decade ago. So if you were to follow these sources, you might conclude that dating today does indeed suck, and most people do blame the apps. With a catalog of millions of options, hopefully you're bound to find someone, but how many frogs must you kiss before you find your prince or princess, whether that be for one night or a lifetime? Because that too varies. Tinder reports that about 1 in 10 right swipes result in a match. A 2019 study found that 30% of dating app users need between 6 to 10 matches to find someone they're interested in dating more than once. According to Hinge, their users typically go on a date with 1 in every 10 matches. Bumble has reported that users typically have to match with multiple people before finding someone they connect with, which I will concur with that one. OkCupid data suggests that it takes about 6 to 10 matches to result in one date. However, these numbers can vary based on how often you also swipe right. I can admit I'm pretty picky, swiping right on probably about 1% of the profiles I actually see. In comparison, women on average swipe right on about 14% of the profiles they see, while men swipe on about 46%. Just basing this one on logic, like the more you swipe right, the more you're likely to get a match. I guess it's up to you to determine quality over quantity, or if you're just looking for a quick rush that someone's interested, swipe right, and your ego is bound to find its reward. Now, if you were to ask whether dating apps work according to the app makers themselves, finding love so the app can be deleted, the simple, direct answer is no. If they did work, the apps wouldn't make a profit or offer free versions. It's impossible to guarantee a connection, and algorithms or compatibility tests don't work, no matter even if the apps claim that they do. Because once you ask to prove it, they can't. Offer citing intellectual property and refusing to share data. In 2005, experts like Philip Zimbardo concluded that eHarmony's algorithm actually gave only 1 in 500 the chance of marrying a recommended match. Giving 50% chance of that, it would take 346 dates over 19 years before you actually found the one. That is because anybody who knows how our bodies work know that predicting a connection based on formula is likely as believing vampires can survive on blood while being dead. Consciously, we may connect with someone on an app due to physical appearance or a high percentage of matching answers, but meeting in person is essential for determining any sort of connection, whether that's for a quick hookup or a long-term relationship. The fantasies that we create in our mind can dramatically change when confronted with reality. It's not just about someone not looking like their pictures, which I'll touch on later, but also the energetic connection or the vibe required for true compatibility. Allow me to interrupt this online dating discussion to share how we romantically and sexually connect on a biological and psychological level when we first meet someone. Despite rapid changes in dating and societal views on sex, the role of neurotransmitters and hormones in love and attachment has remained fundamentally the same over years. In our most instinctual and primal nature, we are driven towards connection primarily for one purpose: sex. Before the advancements of technology, such as artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization, sex was the only way our genetic line could survive. Despite all of our complex thoughts and feelings, the drive is shared by every living creature on this planet: the need to survive. Since we eventually die, reproduction guarantees the survival of our species, highlighting how social species are interconnected in ways that we fully don't understand. But we're getting there. For years, research on love and sex was mostly psychological and observational. It's only been in the last 75 years or so that we've been able to have the technology to fully understand the brain on love. Advances in neuroscience have allowed for more detailed studies using technologies like functional MRIs or fMRI to observe brain activity in real time, leading to deeper understanding of how love and attachment are processed in the brain. In more recent years, polyvagal therapy has also come on the scene, studying how our bodies respond as well. Add in interpersonal neurobiology, and you've got an amazing scientific cocktail on not only understanding how we connect, but also how we fuck up our relationships time and time again. But the point is, meeting in person is crucial because that's how our bodies communicate together. The more we disconnect in person and connect online, this could drive an evolutionary change within our species to survive. Without being able to procreate, or at least trick our bodies into thinking we are, it will start to adapt to survive. And personally, to me, that kind of sounds terrifying because it will most likely result in some kind of evolutionary genetic mutation. Now, when you meet somebody for the first time, there's a bunch of switches that get flipped. First is your visual cortex. So your brain can process the other person's appearance, triggering the release of neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine. These two chemicals create the initial spark of attraction and excitement. Your amygdala also wakes up, assessing the potential threats or rewards, which hopefully signals awards. But if that person triggers any implicit memories that you don't remember, but your body actually does, you may be immediately turned off. At the same time, your body releases a cocktail of hormones, including adrenaline, causing those butterflies in the stomach and sweating palms, cortisol, the stress hormones that keep you on your toes, and oxytocin, the cuddle hormone that promotes bonding and trust. Your brain is actually forming new neural connections as you learn about your potential partner, literally rewiring itself in real time. Your mirror neurons system is also vibe checking the other person's emotions to make sure you're understanding their true intention, while your prefrontal cortex is working overtime to help you make a good impression and not say something ridiculous. All the while, your heart rate and blood flow increases to prepare for the body for action, and testosterone is there to help move that action into something sexual, just in case. But I know what you're thinking. Well, we don't have to be in person for all that to happen, and you don't. But one major component to the connection is our eyes. They say that the eyes are the windows to one's soul, and they truly are. Humans are the only mammals with prominent visible scleria, that white part, allowing us to track movements for more subtle and nuanced nonverbal communication. And we do this from the moment that we are born. Early eye contact is crucial for forming attachment and developing social skills, especially between the infant and the mother. In the simplest of terms, your mom's face was your first emotional support system. One famous study done in the 70s by Edward Tronick, called the Still Face Experiment, showed how babies become distressed when their mother suddenly stops responding with facial expressions. It demonstrates how important facial cues and eye contact are for infant emotional regulation. Babies learn to interpret and express emotions largely through their caregivers' faces. This forms the foundation for later emotional intelligence and empathy. In addition, Around 3 to 6 months, babies start to also follow their caregiver's gazes, a skill that is crucial for joint attention and later social development. Around 6 to 8 months, babies then start to engage in social referencing, looking to their caregivers to understand how to react to new situations or people. So, when you were a baby and your parents fought all the time or engaged in domestic abuse or feared one another, this chronic exposure to fearful or stressed caregivers can affect the development of a child's stress response system. This could potentially lead to heightened anxiety or stress reactivity later in life without you even realizing it. Because while we can't form explicit memories at this age, we do form implicit emotional memories, and repeated experiences of seeing fear associated between your caregivers can give you an unconscious association. On top of that, the way our caregivers use eye contact to repair relationships, ruptures like after being disciplined or a stressful or fearful situation, can influence how we handle conflicts in adult relationships. For example, if your mom always made sure to reestablish loving eye contact after a conflict, you might find yourself naturally doing the same with your partners. But if she cowered away or avoided to look at you, you will most likely be doing the same. Eye contact between a mother and infant releases oxytocin in both parties. This love hormone promotes bonding and feelings of safety and trust. It's nature's way of cementing that early, crucial relationship. The pattern of eye contact and emotional communication we learn in infancy can influence our adult relationships and how we attach our securely or insecurely. In fact, insecure attachment can cause one to avoid eye contact, not allowing for prolonged eye contact that triggers a release of phenethylamine, a chemical associated with falling in love. In addition, our pupils dilate when we see someone we're attracted to. This is an unconscious response controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Humans find people with dilated pupils more attractive, creating a feedback loop of attraction. And you can't deny that someone's gaze is important. If I was to meet somebody for a date and the first thing they look at is my chest, their intentions are pretty clear right from the get-go. But then you say, okay, well, that's what FaceTime is for, or virtual dating. Fine, I'll give you that. But there is one thing that you cannot virtually do, and that is smell. We may not sniff each other's butts the first chance we meet each other like most animals do, but we are able to sniff out one's pheromones that allows your brain to secretly run a genetic compatibility check. You can kind of consider this biological right or left swipe. That's right. Studies have shown that we can actually smell genetic compatibility. Our bodies produce a unique odor print based on your major histocompatibility complex or MHC genes. We tend to be attracted to people with different MHC genes without us even knowing it, because this could lead to a stronger immune system in potential offspring. MHC genes can sometimes lead us to be attracted to people who don't fit our usual type on paper or completely reject somebody that you thought you connected with online. In one famous experiment, women preferred the smell of t-shirts worn by men with MHC genes different from their own. This preference was only reversed when women were on hormonal birth control, which affect our natural scent preferences. This is because birth control tricks your body into thinking that you're pregnant, bypassing the need to check for that diversity as well. But this is also the reason why you may suddenly lose interest in a partner once you get off birth control. So just keep that in mind. So even though it's a first date and you may not be thinking about having a baby with this person, but your body is, and it's in it for the long game. Genetic diversity is important to prevent the spread of genetic diseases and why you don't find yourself being sexually attracted to family members. At least I hope not. And what happens when we continue to date somebody? Well, I will get into that when I get into the B's. But let's get back to actually online dating. I understand I may seem like I'm kind of against it. And to be transparent, I am and I'm not. I'm not a fan of it because I do need that vibe check. It is so essential for me. I would rather match with someone on an app and meet in person after a few questions than have weeks of conversations. But living in a new place, working from home, and being a full-time dog mom to two beautiful Airedales hinders opportunities to meet, and honestly, curiosity befalls me at random moments. But I keep myself limited to one, and I'm conscious of all my interactions. Because to return to my previous questions, do the benefits outweigh the cons when it comes to online dating? No, I don't believe so. And it's because as the rise of the use of apps may be allowed for more connections to meet, but also it brings a rise of deception. A 2020 study conducted by the Pew Research Center reported that 46% of Americans viewed online dating sites as unsafe, but yet we're still using them because we live in a world where convenience is preferred. But with this has brought a new level of concern, including if you're actually speaking to somebody that's real or AI generated. I truly do not understand the direction humanity is going when we're taking to dating apps to scam one another. Online romance fraud has grown significantly within the US, reaching over $547 million in losses in 2021, which is a six-fold increase from 2017. Scammers often target wealthy Westerners seeking romantic relationships, especially ones that may come off desperate or needy, making them an easy target to groom. Then they drop some urgency or scarcity tactic to get them to pay out money. The psychological impact on these victims can be very severe, even those who don't actually lose money. And despite what most people think, both men and women can be victims. Either way, I strongly advise you to do your due diligence before dishing out any cash or getting emotionally invested with someone that you cannot meet in person, no matter the circumstances. I already mentioned the signs of what to look for a fake profile, but in today's time, everyone has some sort of digital footprint. If you cannot find their name searching online, then there is a big red flag. Also, don't be ashamed to use Google reverse image. If they show up with different names anywhere else, that is also a red flag. But even if you manage to find a real person, it doesn't mean that their profile is. Dating apps put you on the market, meaning you need to sell yourself to get that swipe. And for those that experience lower levels of self-esteem are going to skew their numbers or even their whole profile. One study found that 10% of real app users have completely fake profiles. And another one found that 80% of app users have some sort of lie on their profile. Men most commonly lie about their height, while women most commonly lie about their weight, even though I don't know which app makes a woman put on her weight. The next in line for deception is age on both sexes, both young and old. So if you're someone that likes them young, you better best be checking some IDs before you get slapped with a statutory rape conviction and listed on the sexual offenders registry for the rest of your life, even though that may be where you belong. In addition, some lie about their name for whatever reason, income or job, and hobbies and interests. Now, for myself, I have met some men that have lied about their height or skewed it a bit, and I won't go out with them again if they do. It showcases insecurities and deception, and that's not what I want from someone, especially on a first date. And trust me, neither do you, because one study showed that the stronger the deception, the more likely they will possess some dark triad traits. Machiavellism emerged as the strongest predictor of online deceptive behavior. Those high in this dark trait were more likely to use fake names, alter their age, and engage in more frequent deceptions about appearance and relationship status. Narcissism was associated with drastic photo editing or using photos that do not represent yourself currently, and lying about wealth. Low self-esteem was also linked to using false photos, while high self-esteem was associated with more drastic photo editing. But deception over a few profile stats isn't really the worst case scenario. No, the worst case scenario is deception that leads to sexual assault. Several countries have seen an increase in reported sexual assault linked to dating apps. For example, in the UK, reports of such crimes have increased six-fold between 2019 and 2014. It's important to note that sexual assault is generally unreported, though, so the numbers may be even truly higher. Now, while there is a correlation between the increased dating app use and reported sexual assault, it doesn't necessarily mean the apps are causing the assaults. It could also reflect an increase in reporting or other societal factors. However, dating apps can create situations that increase vulnerability, such as meeting strangers in private settings or feeling pressured to engage in sexual activities. Some studies suggest that certain apps may be associated with higher risk than others, often correlating with apps that focus on more of the casual hookups versus the long-term relationships. With that being said, please make sure to always meet in a busy public place, no matter how long you've talked to them or even if they seem nice. Also, let a friend or four know about them in case anything was to happen. When I meet someone new for the first time, I inform at least 3 friends, and I have a close network of peeps that I always share my location with, just in case. But one type of deception that is definitely driven by dating apps is availability, and it's more common than many would like to believe. Studies suggest that anywhere from 10 to 30% of people use dating apps are actually in relationships or married. Some surveys found that up to 42% of Tinder users were already in relationships. Another one has stated like 63%. Another study found that about 18% of married individuals had dating profiles. While both men and women engage in this behavior, some suggest that men are slightly more likely to do so. The reason for this deception varies, but the most common ones are including seeking attention or an ego boost. They're looking for casual encounters due to some kind of emotional or sexual dissatisfaction in their current relationships. They're testing the waters to see if they're still desirable or they're addicted to the thrill of this new connection. From a psychological perspective, this behavior often stems from the complex mix of factors, including unmet needs in a current relationship, fear of commitment or intimacy, low self-esteem or need for external validation, thrill-seeking or risk-taking personality traits, cognitive dissonance, which is the ability to hold conflicting beliefs about one's actions. This deception can obviously have very serious consequences, not just for the unsuspecting matches, but also for the cheater's primary relationship and their own mental health. Now, some apps have tried to address this by allowing users to link their relationship status from Facebook or other social media. However, it's still very easy to circumvent these measures, especially if they don't even have a social media profile. So some people, well, women, decided to take matters into their own hands to ensure one's safety for any potential deception dating can bring today. As some may compare the pages of Lady Whistledown's gossip pages to Are We Dating the Same Guy's Facebook groups, it is so much more than that. This only came into my radar in the past year. It was this group I was referring to when I had mentioned in my previous lessons about that forum where I discovered A's alter ego being discussed to close to 100 women, and also recently by a few more. I can't say whether this group hindered or helped my situation, to be honest. I mean, if I had never found it, I suppose I wouldn't have confronted him, and perhaps our relationship would have grown if he was trying to make some kind of clean slate. Because despite all those women showcasing the same stories, I had not experienced that with him up to this point. But yes, eventually he did end up proving them right. But that was his choice. Like, he knew about the group, and instead of taking it as an opportunity to prove all those women wrong and show there was more to him than what they had perceived, he instead chose to blame all the women that were judging him simply as they didn't know him and it was slander. And I could see this point of view when it's one or two or maybe even three. But any more than that, then you've got a pattern. The more people that have the same experience with one common denominator, that one common thing is most likely the problem. He also tried saying he was just trying to get over his ex, so basically using them to help boost his ego, yet hurting other people because you're hurting is not an excuse. But guess what? A wasn't the only one that claimed slander. In fact, there have been 2 lawsuits filed by 2 different men with the same exact scenario, pretty much, against Are We Dating the Same Guy maker. But guess what? They were both dismissed. Why? Because slander is telling lies about someone that ruins their reputation. Let me reiterate. Telling lies. If they are telling the truth, that is not slander. It's just the facts check and freedom of speech. If you don't want people speaking badly about you, then don't treat people poorly. Simply put, instead of wasting money on lawyers, which one of these men is filing an appeal and will still lose, perhaps that money should be used on a therapist that specializes in narcissism. And for those men that are complaining about these groups, can we not be calling the kettle black here? Because in retaliation, men have started their own group. Are we dating the same girl? And the word on the street is that they're not doing it with the same intentions, often posting new pictures of their ex, which is actually grounds for suing and in some states even arrest. So let's be careful, gentlemen. However, with that being said, I would caution women that take the word of every post as truth. If the man is in a relationship or married, yes. Abusive or dangerous, definitely yes. But I've seen some posts where they say the guy is weird. Can we kind of work on reframing this? Because unless like weird is that they ask for some lock of hair, like what one person may find weird, another may find unique. I actually had this happen on a recent date I went on. Yes, I checked the group prior to going out just in case, which there were 2 posts from over a year ago. One had said that he had a temper and ended up ghosting her, while another said he was really nice, but weird. I didn't find him weird at all. In fact, we had a really great conversation. And we actually even ended up discussing this group because I guess a friend of his had showed him the group, which often happens, and showed him the post that the girls have written about. Now, I did not tell him that I had seen the post. I just wanted him to talk about, to understand what his point of view was, to determine if he was one of those people that took offense to it, or was it someone that could learn something from it. And he said that he described them to the T, and he said that the one post where that girl was upset, he had thought about it and he realized like she was right and actually reached out to her to apologize. So there, see, this is what a self-aware, mature person looks like. Overall, dating apps may be convenient, but they need a huge overhaul. And as I can go into the details of addiction encouragement and the damages of option overload, these are not directly related to the birds and the bees. And I feel I have made a strong enough point. But I will make one last note on option overload. Now, these numbers can be skewed, but one survey found that 20% of app users are speaking to 11 or more people at the time. In other states, like 25% speak to 4 or 5 people at one time, 11% speak to 1, and 8% speak to none, which I'm kind of like, well, then what's the point? But I was actually astonished by this. I would love to know how in the hell anybody has time to speak to 11 or more people at one time. Please, I really do want to know, like, or even 4 or 5. Like, I need some context here, people. Are you speaking to them every day? Is it just like a few times a week? I mean, how do you have the time? I understand people like having options, but too many can produce choice overload and undermine decision making. And I understand this firsthand. I can't decide half the time on what to buy when shopping online because it's so overwhelming. Research show that shoppers are more likely to purchase from smaller selections. So the more online dating profiles you're exposed to, people misremember information, switch to poor decision strategies, and are less satisfied with their ultimate choice. So I encourage you to limit your selection as well as your time you spend swiping to prevent burnout and allow yourself to make some real connections if that is your ultimate goal. I have purposely left out one stat though when it comes to dating apps. And that is what the intentions are of the users to pivot into discussing the taboo sides of the birds and the bees. The word taboo is defined as something that is not acceptable to say, mention, or do according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I do love that the fact that when I Googled define taboo, its meaning came as prohibited or restricted by social customs, with the sentence example being sex was a taboo subject. Sex, something that is completely natural and enjoyable, at least it should be, and is prohibited or restricted by social customs. Perhaps this sentence should fall more under the other definition, which is a social or religious custom prohibiting or forbidding the discussion of a particular practice or forbidding association with a particular person, place, or thing. Because that is why sex is taboo, religion. But despite the societal uptick to sexual exposure, because, sex does sell, remember? Approximately 50% of people are uncomfortable talking about it in general, and about 30% are uncomfortable talking about it with their sexual partner. Guess what? I am not one of those people in either category. But if you are, lucky for you, I'm not asking you to talk about it. I'm just asking you to listen. With the rise of online dating has also brought the rise of casual sex, or as the kids are now calling it, hookup culture. In 2023, a survey by the Pew Research Center found that 44% of dating app users say it's to meet a long-term partner. 40% said it was to date casually. 24% was for casual sex, and 22% was to make new friends, even though 31% of men are much more likely than the 13% of women to say casual sex. But I also have a feeling like that 40% of casual daters were most likely referring to casual sex or situationships, but probably felt it was too taboo to say. How did we get here? A place that is viewing sex so widely and easily available, but still feels wrong to talk about it? The history of sex is quite vast, and it would take hours to go through all the nuances. But allow me to do a condensed, simple review of societal views on sex, mixing in some STI seasonings, shall we? Now, on a side note, you may have noticed that STDs have changed to STIs. And why does that matter? Because a disease and infection are two separate things. All sexual bacteria and viruses and funguses do have an infection, but not all of them lead to diseases. For example, HIV is a sexually transmitted infection, while AIDS is the disease that can develop from the untreated HIV infection, hence STD. Now, sex and STIs have gone together like peas and carrots, and it's even considered one of the theories of why we chose to become monogamous, which the correlation to the reduction of monogamy and the rise of STDs seems like that theory can even be more supported now. However, whenever monogamy began, our prehistoric ancestors most likely skipped the birds and the bees talks, and it was more about a take what you want free for all, regardless of the species within the homogeneous. Thanks to 23andMe, we now can know just how freaky our ancestors got with Neanderthals. But it wasn't all fun and games. This interspecies mingling left us with some unwanted souvenirs. Neanderthals gifted us the extremely human papillomavirus, or HPV STI, especially HPV-16, which is the most dangerous. But don't worry, we graciously returned the favor by giving them the herpes simple virus, or HSV. Fast forward to ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, where sex was viewed as a divine act and a practical aspect of life. The Greeks and Romans were relatively open about sex, especially when it came to homosexuality relationships, including pederasty in Greece, which was a relationship between an older man and an adolescent boy. However, adultery was frowned upon, especially for women, surprise, surprise, but it was still common. Then came Christianity, which hit the reset button on sex. Suddenly, chastity and marital fidelity was all the rage, with sex primarily being a baby-making activity. Extramarital sex, homosexuality, and even non-making baby sex within marriage were a big no-no. Celibacy was the new cool, especially for clergy, but we all know how that one turned out. And virginity was highly prized for women. Now, the Renaissance era brought sexy back, sort of. reintroducing eroticism as a complement to love. However, it had to contend with Protestant Reformation and Catholic conservatism. It also brought the emergence of syphilis, which quickly became a pandemic. Its rise led to increased stigma around sex and prostitution, even though its origins is believed to have stemmed from Christopher Columbus's crew bringing it back from America. While this theory is debated, it is considered the most likely case due to the origins, timing, and location, and then it having to quickly spread. This would mean that that crew had sex with American natives and most likely not consensual. Despite what Disney portrays, natives did not fall in love with English men. Some were forced into marriage, usually around age 12, or raped. As syphilis continued to rise, the 18th century Enlightenment period brought sex into the realm of science, figuring out just how babies are made, or at least so they thought. Spoiler alert, it is not tiny men swimming around in penises. But just as things were heating up, the 19th century Victorian era came along and threw a wet blanket on everything. Public discussions of sex became taboo, and though plenty was happening behind closed doors, including pornography and prostitution, women were expected to be virtuous and chaste, while men had a little bit more sexual freedom. It's amazing to me how this has not evolved whatsoever. At the turn of the 20th century, Freud's theories brought sexuality back into the public discourse, linking it to psychological development and health. The Roaring Twenties saw a rise in sexual liberation, but also caused women to be put in camps if suspected of having an STI or engaging in prostitution. More on this in a bit. The discovery of penicillin in the 1940s caused syphilis rates to decline dramatically, and then the end of World War II disrupted traditional gender roles, leading to shifts in sexual norms. But women still face stricter rules than men in most cultures. Again, no evolution in this. The 50s shifted back into traditional views of sex and marriage, but involving love. Now, the 60s and 70s, like I said, made a dramatic shift towards sexual liberation, and this is also when birth control was first released, feminist movements, and the decriminalization of homosexuality in many parts of the world. The legalization and proliferation of pornography challenged traditional views on sexuality and sparked new discussions about sexual freedoms and exploitations. The HIV and AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s had a profound impact on sexual behavior and public health policies, and it led to increased awareness about safe sex practices and sparked the important conversations about LGBTQ plus rights and healthcare access. As we round out the 1900s and move into the new millennium, the gay rights movements gain momentum, leading to an increased visibility and legal rights for LGBTQ plus individuals. Comprehensive PSAs and sex education in schools begun to replace abstinence-only programs in many areas, focusing on health, consent, and relationships. Now here we are in the digital age. Internet has revolutionized sex with apps and online platforms facilitating new ways to connect and express sexually. There's a growing acceptance of spectrum of sexual identities and practices, including asexuality, pansexuality, and polygamy. Pornography is available at the touch of a button, and sex work is being increasingly recognized as a legitimate profession. I really do hope they eventually form a union. Yet, even with all this progress, we are still in this unique dichotomy. Some shun it, some love it, but it is everywhere, leading to desensitization to sex scandals in leadership positions and a dramatic increase in sex trafficking and forced sex labor that no one is doing or even talking about. I mean, we have a Speaker of the House that has a no porn pact with his son that is tracked through an app, but then he shows up to support Trump at the trial of him paying off a porn star. We have a religious-backed Supreme Court that rules on personal beliefs rather than actual justice, that is making it harder for accessible birth control and reversing all those progressive laws that came forward in the past. Now, I don't care if you are pro-choice or pro-life. Abortion wouldn't be a topic if there was enough accessible resources to avoid getting pregnant in the first place. In addition, I'm not even taking a feminist stance on this, but men really have no right voting or imposing laws on what women can and cannot do with their body. I mean, can you imagine if women got together and decided to pass a law stating that men had to get vasectomies? And you know what? They freaking should. It's reversible and quick. It would save millions of birth control, and women wouldn't have to fuck up their bodies in the process. See? There you go. Problem solved, at least in that department. But one thing that it would not prevent, though, is STIs. Despite all the available information, STI rates are rising at an alarming pace. It's practically an epidemic at this point. In recent years, we've seen the emergence of new STIs like Mycoplasma genitalium, as well as antibiotic-resistant strains of gonorrhea. These developments highlight the ongoing need for comprehensive sex education and regular testing, which is free, by the way. And I will include a link in the notes below where you can check to see where you can get tested for free in your own area. But instead, some schools are going as far as banning the word sex from their curricula. I'm looking at you, Florida. Now, according to the CDC, The last STI surveillance report in 2022 and the last 5 years, chlamydia has declined about 6%, but has stayed the same between 2021 and 2022. Gonorrhea saw a decline between 2021 and 2022 of 9%, but it is still up 11% over the last 5 years. Perhaps the most concerning cases, though, are the ones of syphilis, which has seen a 79% increase in the last 5 years, 17% between 2021 and 2022, reaching the highest it's been since the 50s. In addition to that, congenital syphilis, which is syphilis passed down from a mother to a baby, has risen 183% over the last 5 years. And it's not just in the young kids or sexual preferences. STIs are rising across the board. Even nursing homes had a rise of syphilis outbreaks, which really surprised me considering the dark history around it. Because what some may not know is that prior to the discovery of penicillin, it drove women to be pulled off the streets, forced to be examined by a doctor, and put in working camps. I know what you're thinking. Sure, that didn't happen in the US, but yes, it did. And it was even enacted as a law in multiple states. Didn't learn about this one in history class? Please, feel free to take notes. Because during World War I, there was a significant concern about the spread of STIs, particularly syphilis and gonorrhea, which were seen as major threats to the health of American troops. Now, to prevent troops in future wars that may come from being affected, the Chamberlain-Conn Act of 1918 provided federal funding to combat venereal diseases, leading to the establishment of the American Plan. The solution? Blame women and lock them up, especially those suspected of prostitution or even promiscuous. Women suspected of carrying STIs could be detained and forcibly examined. Those found to be infected were often quarantined in detention centers, or they called them reformatories. Now, of course, this law was vague on what promiscuous looked like. They didn't need proof or evidence to claim a woman was promiscuous. She wore red lipstick. Well, she must have an STI. If her dress was just a little too high, or if she was dressed to go out and meet her girlfriends, then, well, she's obviously a slut. They would literally pull women off the streets, force them down on a table to examine, and had a doctor look and said, yeah, well, she's had sex, so she must have an STI, lock her up. Whether she actually had one or not, whether she had sex or not, it did not matter. This led to, of course, widespread abuse and violation of civil liberties. These detention centers or working camps were often really harsh and had inadequate medical care or poor living conditions. Women would be held there for extended periods. They claimed it was until they were cured, but it was often longer, especially if they didn't have the disease to begin with. This, of course, led to public outcry and legal challenges, but it was still practiced in some areas until World War II. In fact, some states still have laws that allow the detainment of women without due process if suspected of an STI, even though they're no longer enforced. But I would like to see them removed off the books completely. So why is there a rise in STIs? Well, the reduction of sex education in schools is definitely not helping. And the stigmas around STIs hinders people from talking about it or getting tested despite it being free. And while we are getting more ignorant around the topic, the STIs are getting smarter and evolving to becoming antibiotic resistant. But the biggest reason for the increase of STIs seems to be because of dating apps. Now, research indicates the rise of dating apps has contributed significantly to the rise in sexual transmitted infections. Dating app users tend to have more sexual partners, more frequent sexual encounters, and higher rates of unprotected sex compared to non-users. For instance, one study found that individuals that use dating apps are 1.5 times more likely to contract an STI than those who don't. Notably, male dating app users were identified as the most impactful group to target for STI prevention campaigns. But you know what? I bet we won't be putting them in camps. The research also suggests that in-app prevention campaigns would be very effective in reducing STI rates, with one scenario analysis indicating that 40% reduction in transmission rates among app users could result in a 40% decrease in male STI incidence and 29% in females. Now, these findings underscore the complex relationship between digital technology, sexual behavior, and public health, highlighting the need for targeted interventions within app dating platforms. But I would be very surprised if dating apps are going to jump on board to help. Swiping through an app with a pop-up about talking about an STI is like putting lungs with cancer on a pack of cigarettes. Effective? Yes. Profitable? No. So that means it's up to you to do your due diligence when you're planning on doing it. Most STIs at this point are also becoming asymptomatic until either they become a disease or they do irreversible damage. So getting tested is key. I get tested whenever I sleep with someone new. I make sure I am a clean slate before I decide to get dirty. And if something was to show up, I know exactly who to go to. But I also am not shy to ask when they were also last tested. Granted, there is an honor system in this, and you'd think most would be honest, but the most common STI, HPV, which has around 40 different strains, of late is not testable in men. And while it does tend to clear up on its own after 1 to 2 years, sometimes shorter depending on the age and the strain, there are 14 dangerous strains that do lead to cancer. That is cervical, anal, or throat cancer, depending on where you prefer the lollipop. But the most notorious are HPV 16 and 18, which are responsible for about 70% of cervical cancers. In addition, HPV can lead to genital warts, strain 6 and 11, especially, but are not dangerous, but they're definitely not pretty. Now, HPV can be contracted through sex and skin-to-skin contact of open sores. Females get tested via the pap smear or an HPV DNA test. The latest HPV vaccine, Gardasil 9, does protect against 9 strains, 7 which are high risk and 2 of low risk, which I believe you can get up to age 45 now, but please double check on that. Now, as for the rest of STIs out there, well, there are approximately 10, including HPV, but I'm not including Zika, Ebola, or monkeypox in that list, which can be sexually transmitted, but in other ways as well. Now, I'm going to do my best to keep things light here, but knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your health and relationships. So I'm going to give you the rundown of the current cast of characters in the STI or STD lineup. So for the star of the show, we got chlamydia, first making its appearance in ancient times, but was isolated in 1907. Now, this is transmitted vaginally, anally, or orally. Chlamydia is often asymptomatic, but it can include discharge or burning sensation while urinating. If undetected, it can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease in women and infertility in both men or women. To get tested, it involves either a urine test or a swab of the cervix for females or urethra for males. It is curable through antibiotics, though. Our second runner-up is gonorrhea, or the clap, as it was called. Now, this first appeared as early as 2600 BCE in China. Now, this is transmitted obviously through sexual contact, vaginally, anally, or orally. And the symptoms are often asymptomatic, but it can include, again, discharge or painful urination. If undetected, it will also lead to pelvic inflammatory disease in women, or infertility in men and women, and increased risk of HIV transmission. It's also a urine test or the swab of the cervix for females or urethra for males. Gonorrhea is also curable by antibiotics, but it typically involves a combination due to the antibiotic-resistant concerns that it is currently developing. Number 3, syphilis. This first appeared, like I said, in Europe in the late 1500s, and this can also be contracted sexually, but also passed down from mother to child. The symptoms involve painless sores, rash, and flu-like symptoms, but the stages do vary. If you become asymptomatic or it goes undetected, it can cause damage to the organs, including the brain, heart, and nerves. It is detected through blood tests. In some cases, though, fluid from the sores may also be tested. It is curable with antibiotics, usually penicillin, but it does depend on the type and duration of the stage of infection. Number 4, we got HIV and AIDS. This is also, of course, sexually transmitted, but it could also be contracted through blood transfusions or from a mother to a child. Symptoms are initially very flu-like, but later on, they can cause infections that due to a weakened immune system. If it goes undetected, it does progress into AIDS with life-threatening infections and cancers. Now, this first appeared in 1981, but it likely originated earlier in the 20th century. It is detectable by blood tests or oral swab. There is no cure, but it can be managed with antiretroviral therapy. Next up, we got herpes simple virus, or HSV, which is 1 or 2. Now, 1 is cold sores of the mouth, and 2 is vaginally or anally down below. This can be contracted sexually or through kissing, or you can also get herpes 1 down below if you're going down below. Now, this includes painful blisters or sores, but it can also be asymptomatic. If it is undetected, you may have an increased risk of HIV transmission or potential complications during pregnancy. This also first appeared, like I said, in ancient times. We gave that to the Neanderthals. It went into type 1 and 2 in the 1960s. This is detected through blood tests or a swab of blisters or sores if they are present. There is no cure, but it can be managed with antiviral medications to reduce outbreaks or transmission risk. Next up, that was first described in 1833, is lymphogranuloma venereum, or LGV. This includes painless sores followed by swollen lymph nodes. It can cause severe scarring and chronic inflammation. They must swab the infected area, or you have to have a blood test to test for antibodies. This is curable, usually through antibiotics. Next up, trichomoniasis. This was first described in 1836, and symptoms are often asymptomatic, but it include itching, burning, and discharge. If undetected, again, there's an increased risk of HIV transmission or potential complications during pregnancy. To be tested for this, it requires a vaginal swab or a urine test, or urethral swab for men. It is curable, again, by antibiotics. Then in 1965, the first appearance of hepatitis B. Now, this can be sexual contact, of course, through blood or from mother to child as well. Often asymptomatic, but it may include jaundice, fatigue, and abdominal pain. If undetected, it can lead to chronic liver disease and liver cancer. It is only detectable through a blood test. And acute infections often do clear on their own, though. However, chronic infections are managed with antiviral medications. There is no cure for this, but it can be controlled. Mycoplasma genitalium was first discovered in 1981. Again, only through sexual contact usually, and it is often asymptomatic. It may cause urethritis in men or cervicitis in women. If undetected, it can potentially lead to pelvic inflammatory disease or infertility in both men and women. It is detectable through a urine or a swab of the cervix or urethra. It is also curable through antibiotics, even though antibiotic resistance is a growing concern in this one. And there you got it, the cast of characters for STIs as of 2024. Like I said, many of these STIs are treatable or manageable with modern medicine. The key to prevent these is through regular testing, open communication with partners, and practicing safe sex. Stay informed, stay safe, and make sure that you keep the conversation going. And just an FYI, if you think it's no big deal to pass on an STI to someone, even though you know you have one, think again. Many states have laws that allow people to sue someone if they knowingly exposes or infects them with an STI. Some states even have criminal laws specifically about STI transmission. Now, these laws are specific to certain STIs, often HIV, while others are somewhat broadly applicable to any STIs. Even though the word knowingly is key, most of these laws do hinge on whether the person knew they had the STI and failed to disclose it or take precautions. It's the difference between accidentally stepping on someone's foot and deliberately kicking them. So you often need to show that that person knew that they were infected and intentionally or recklessly exposed you. Some states, though, require people with certain STIs to disclose their status to their sexual partners, and California law actually mandates the disclosure of all STIs, not just HIV, before engaging in sexual activities that can risk transmission. Consequences can range from misdemeanors to felonies in some criminal cases or monetary damages in civil cases. Now, it is worth noting that some of these laws are considered controversial. Supporters say that it's great because they protect public health and hold people accountable, while critics often argue and they may discourage testing and increase stigma around STIs. Now, one fire-sure way of avoiding anything burning down there is abstinence, of course, at least with another human, because sex robots are becoming increasingly popular, especially with features such as lifelike skin, warming capabilities, and equipped with AI so they can engage in conversation. Now, I'm not here to pass judgment or sex shame anyone, but I'm not going to dive into this topic specifically because it would be a lesson within itself surrounding the ethical concerns around dolls that resemble children and the concerns around what this could do to someone psychologically and socially. I only bring it up because as the AI and robotics advance, the combination with sex should be a concern because sex creates feelings for another in humans. So what happens when those feelings are not able to be returned? And what happens if we decide that they should be? I'll explain more on this in a bit, but I mean, come on, that's like just a B-rated horror film waiting to happen. It's like Fatal Robotic Attraction. Now, for those not interested in playing with dolls, pornography has become as easy to watch as a TikTok video. In January of 2020, Pornhub was the 10th most visited website on the planet, surpassing Netflix and Amazon. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not anti-porn. I think it can be very entertaining and spice up a relationship, if viewed in moderation, and discussed openly between partners. However, like all things that bring rewards, too much of good eventually leads to something bad. I mean, I love chocolate, but if I ate it multiple times a day, eventually it's going to affect my health, and well, so does porn. And we are also sliding into a new territory with the rise of virtual reality porn, making 2D view into an immersive 3D experience, blurring the lines of fidelity boundaries. Excessive porn consumption is causing problems like erectile dysfunction in young men, unrealistic expectations in relationships, and difficulties connecting on a romantic level. You may have seen some mainstream channels where younger women have been promoting anti-sex practices while dating and even in relationships. One reason for this petition is because of the demand of performance expected by their male partners. It's a bit surprising to me that so many men, and I'm not even stereotyping here, but that think that this labeled amateur or a newbie, that, oh, it must be a home video. But it's not. Porn is a production. It's a movie. It's a sex movie, whether it's 10 minutes or 2 hours long. I mean, do you also think that driving down the car in the middle of a street at 120 miles per hour, destroying property and blowing up shit is actually real? I mean, honestly, would you watch it if you were just watching two people doing it missionary style or switching it up a bit with one camera view for 2 to 8 minutes, most likely zoomed out? Do you think that's really actually going to sell? Probably not. Even though the website Make Love Not Porn has risen in popularity. Now, this website is a platform where real life couples can upload making love so you can be educated on what sex actually looks like between normal couples and even porn stars when they're not shooting a video. Because the average 20-minute porn clip can take around 4 to 8 hours to make. During that time, sex stars take breaks. Then they have to get back up in more ways than one and also shoot on demand without faking it. Now that's a lot of pressure. Not to mention all those camera views means camera tricks. One porn star explained in an interview that most of the time, especially in the behind, they are getting just the tip. Camera angles can make it look like things are going very deep, when in reality it's just sliding on by. Yet the depictions of sex and pornography, including positions, durations, and various combination of acts, set a standard in the minds of regular viewers, young and old. I had someone explain a scene to me once that they were very interested in reenacting, and as much as I appreciated their openness and sense of adventure, the scene was unrealistic, which I had to explain to him why and how porn is not real life. Now, he by no means put no pressure on me and was very receptive to the information, surprised to find out, but receptive. Now, lucky for me, I'm educated on all sorts of subjects, taboo or not, but I cannot imagine how one would respond to it if they didn't know or feel pressure to do it, so potentially putting them at risk. It's important to note that the vast majority of women do not watch porn and may be unaware of expectations their male partners have developed as a result of this. This disconnect can lead to frustration, disappointment, even sexual coercion or violence. It's also causing a lot of problems for men and how they feel about themselves. In the penis book I mentioned earlier, Dr. Aaron Spitz spoke about the increasing demand of men that are seeking penis enlargements because they are thinking they're not up to size after watching porn. As porn consumption has gone up, so has that number, with 40% of men seeking an upgrade got the idea from watching porn. Excessive porn consumption has also led to the increase of erectile dysfunction in young men, with rates increasing from 5% up to 33% in men under 40 since the invention of streaming porn. Even teenagers are infected, with up to 25% of high school seniors reporting difficulties getting erections, most likely due to the fact of them being exposed to porn right at puberty. One study in 2014 stated over half of college boys were exposed to porn before age 13. And we know that porn consumption has increased dramatically since then. So what's causing it? The more they are exposed, the more the need for them to stay interested. Now, there is a debate on whether or not porn can be addictive. We do know that sex can be, as you're dealing with a lot of the same brain chemicals as involved in drug addiction. The more you take a drug that brings some kind of reward, like cocaine, meth, or heroin, the more you need because you build a tolerance up. Well, porn works the same way, but it's not the sexual behavior that drives one to watch porn, but the anticipation of what will happen. So the more one watches, the more it takes for him to get going, eventually leading one to watch porn he never thought he would, like a straight man watching gay or trans porn. In addition, it creates decreased sexual satisfaction with their partners, as well as difficulty forming emotional connections and maintaining romantic relationships. A 10-year study showed that more porn a husband watched, the greater the chance the problem was in the marriage. Marriage satisfaction went down when husbands watched porn daily, and 52% of divorces involve pornography use. This is because neurologically, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or the DACC, drives the desire for novelty in porn viewing, leading users to seek out increasingly extreme contact. Over time, this desensitization in the brain requires ever-increasing stimulation to achieve that same level of arousal. Compulsive pornography use has also been linked to shrinkage in brain areas associated with romantic love and erections, such as the right conduit of the striatum or the putamen, which may impair an individual's ability to form and maintain intimate relationships. So how much is too much? Well, according to Dr. Spitz, 20 hours a week showed sexual compulsion behavior, while normal men watched about 30 minutes a week. Another states that 11 to 12 hours a week was considered addict status, while another said that 4 hours throughout the week is considered safe. As pornography continues to shape sexual norms and expectations, it's so crucial to foster open, honest communication between partners and their desires. boundaries, and potential impacts of porn consumption on the relationship. Please avoid thinking that anything in porn is real or using it as a baseline for what you think your partner should give you. Because I'm going to tell you, you know what? Truly allowing yourself to connect with someone intimately and emotionally is the best kind of sex you can have. There is a difference between sex and making love, no matter how cheesy that sounds. I mean, you can definitely have hot sex without love. But it's just, I don't know how to explain it, but it's on this different level when love is involved. I don't know one person that will tell you otherwise. But if you don't agree, then I would ask you, were you truly in love or was your relationship toxic? And if you're in a relationship that isn't sexually satisfying you, then you need to talk to your partner about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. If you don't feel comfortable doing so, then you need to also ask yourself why. Are you in a situation where you don't trust your partner? Are you afraid that they're going to judge you? Or are you going to hurt their feelings? Understand that the most three important factors in a healthy relationship is trust, effective communication, and mutual respect. And that also involves what happens between the sheets. So if you believe that you are in a healthy relationship, you should be able to have a healthy sex life. And why is there this difference between sex and making love? Well, because sex helps you fall in love. Now let's continue this breakdown of what happens when two people connect after these first dates and reach home base. Sexual activity triggers the release of several hormones, including testosterone for both men and women, as it increases libido and plays a role in sexual arousal. Estrogen, particularly in women, also influences the libido. Oxytocin is released during physical touch and orgasm, promoting bonding and feelings of closeness, particularly in women. Vasopressin in men, which is linked to social bonding and pair bonding behaviors. Your limbic system lights up, including your amygdala and hippocampus, which are involved in emotional and memories. Your hypothalamus regulates autonomic functions and release hormones such as that oxytocin and vasopressin, while your prefrontal cortex modulates decision-making and self-control, especially when it comes to those safe words, but it does become decreased during intense sexual arousal. Dopamine, associated with pleasure and reward, surges, enhancing the feelings of pleasure and reinforcement. Serotonin, associated with feelings of happiness, fluctuates, influencing mood and post-orgasmic satisfaction. While cortisol, the stress hormone, is being reduced, and this will help with calming once done and an improved mood. And coming in at the end here, pun intended, are endorphins, which are natural painkillers and promoting of feeling of euphoria and relaxation post-orgasm. Now, post-orgasm, the body experiences a refractory period, more pronounced in men, where it returns to its baseline state. This phase is often characterized by feelings of relaxation and satisfaction due to the release of those endorphins and other calming hormones. Now, as mentioned, the most two important players in this love-making game is oxytocin and vasopressin. I've heard over the years, especially from men, of course, that women can get more attached or feelings when it comes to having, because oxytocin is released more in women than men. And while that is true, recent research has understood that vasopressin, released more in men, is also linked to social bonding and pair bonding behaviors. Oxytocin is crucial for creating emotional bonds and feelings of trust and attachment for women. It's released in large amounts during physical touch, orgasm, childbirth, and breastfeeding. In women, oxytocin enhances feelings of intimacy and emotional closeness with their partner. This hormone strengthens that pair bonding process, making sexual activity a deeply connected experience. Higher oxytocin levels are associated with increased trust, empathy, and cooperative behavior. This hormone helps women feel more secure and connected in their relationships. Vasopressin, while also present in women, plays a more prominent role in men regarding social bonding and pair bonding behaviors. It is associated with protective and territorial behaviors, contributing to the male drive to bond and protect their partner. Higher levels of vasopressin are linked to increased protective and territorial behaviors, reinforcing the bond with their partner and enhancing those feelings of attachment. Vasopressin also contributes to emotional connection men feel towards their partner, supporting long-term relationship stability. Understand, however, that a 2022 study found that 95% of men orgasm during sex, while only about 25% of women do. So not getting your woman off is actually decreasing that bonding effect, gentlemen. So you may want to pay more attention and ask your woman what it is that she needs. Because I hate to break it to you, but if you think you're a god in the sack and you haven't asked, she most likely is faking it. I specifically am targeting this to men because it is reported that lesbian women have the highest rate of orgasm, which is about 74%, which makes sense, as a woman should know how it works down there. But with that being said, great sex doesn't guarantee a relationship will last, though it does make it a lot harder to break up. And why doesn't it though? If our bodies are evolved for it to motivate us towards connection and monogamy? Well, first, there are stages to relationships as well as to the chemicals in our brain. Now, one stat states that approximately 70% of unmarried couples break up within their first year. However, that statistic is taken out of context because it doesn't factor in age. Other studies have shown that as we get older and more emotionally mature, at least we should, relationships also last longer. But honestly, there's just too many factors at play to determine how long a relationship should last because it depends on our brain. There are stages to love despite the ever romantic ideals of love at first sight. Even though that is possible, most people experience a lust to love stage. The lust phase typically lasts 6 months to 2 years, hence why a lot of breakups tend to happen around that 2-year mark. During this phase, we have higher levels of dopamine and norepinephrine to create excitement and energy, and testosterone and estrogen to drive that sexual desire. As we start to fall in love, and vasopressin levels increase, promoting bonding and trust, while dopamine and norepinephrine levels stabilize, leading to a calmer, more secure feeling. Now, when this shift happens, some people mistaken it as falling out of love instead of actually falling into a different stage of love. The rose-colored glasses fall off for the first time and you start to see someone for who they really are, especially as challenges arise in the relationship. But if you can get through the hurdles of this shift, you can form a companionship bond that can last a lifetime, or at least it used to. But again, in order for that to happen, it requires communication and trust, which is severely lacking in today's time. And like I said in the beginning, relationships take work, not just with a partner, but also within yourself. And dating apps allow you to scapegoat from having to deal with any of your shadows and fear. You know what? And maybe you don't even want a relationship. Maybe you think it's better to have that freedom than to be tied down. And maybe it is. But the whole point of this lesson is to understand that we are meant to be in relationship. Our brain and our bodies are literally built for it. And there are benefits to a healthy, secure relationship. You tend to live longer and make more money. And that's not even with combined income, right? Because studies show, and they're not really sure why, but men that are married make a higher income, and then once they become divorced, they make less. Healthy relationships can boost your self-esteem, confidence, and motivation, and keep you from contracting any of those STIs as mentioned earlier, as long as both partners, of course, stay faithful. But in order for a relationship to be healthy, you have to be mentally healthy first. And maybe it is dating apps that have allowed for the dating world to suck, or maybe it's just that there's so many people stuck in trauma and fear because they've been told they aren't good enough at some point in their life. The love we give and receive is embedded in our implicit memories, those emotional memories that were formed in infancies. I mean, honestly, do you remember what happened or what you even witnessed between 0 to 3 years of age? Most likely not, but your body does. And so whether you are an avoidant, anxiously attached, borderline, narcissistic, or even antisocial, you become that way because of those years. And as you get older, you try to work on it, right? Like you may think you know what hurt you, especially in the cases of abuse. So you work on that and you think, okay, cool, I'm good. But for some reason, it still remains. Why? Well, what you most likely think you know has been worked through, but not what you don't know. Like for myself, I can easily stem my track record of dating sociopathic men is because of my father being a sociopath. Which, yes, my brain did map that, thinking that this is how a male should behave. But my mother was also involved with him, and she showed me how to respond to him. And how she used me as a support system is how I respond to love without even realizing it. That's why it was triggering for me with my ex. I couldn't understand why I felt so much pain in my body and would go into these panic attacks. But it was because my body remembered it, but my brain did not. And where is that held? Well, let's peer into the biological backstage of our relationship dramas. I mentioned in the beginning about a recent emergence of a new type of therapy called polyvagal therapy. This type of therapy works on resetting the body while rewiring our brain through our vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in our body. Stretches from the brainstem all the way down through our stomach. It's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our rest and digest functions and so much more. Interpersonal neurobiology zooms into what is called the vagal tone. Think of it as like the fitness level of your vagus nerve. The higher your vagal tone, the better your body can regulate stress and engage in social interaction. It's similar to having like a well-trained emergency brake for the racing system of your nerves. A well-functioning vagus nerve can help us read facial expressions, tune into voice tones, and pick up on subtle social clues. It helps us bounce back from stressors more easily, making us more adaptable in our relationships. It allows us to calm down quicker after something stressful happens. It also plays a huge role in empathy, and it is directly connected to those connection hormones that are released during sex. The vagus nerve has oxytocin receptors, indicating a direct link between vagal activity and oxytocin release. Oxytocin can act on the vagus nerve to influence social behaviors, stress responses, and emotional regulations. Oxytocin release via the vagal stimulation enhances social bonding and trust, reinforcing the role of the vagus nerve in facilitating social interactions and emotional connections. The vagus nerve also expresses vasopressin V1A receptors. This suggests that vasopressin can influence vagal activity, which is linked to various autonomic functions and behaviors. The interaction between vasopressin and the vagus nerve can modulate social behaviors, reinforcing emotional and social bonds. But what impairs vagal tone then? Well, one major factor is childhood trauma. And it's not just the big obvious traumas. We're talking about a spectrum of experiences here. I mean, you got acute trauma, which are those big obvious events that can cause immediate and sometimes lasting impact on the nervous system. But you also got chronic stress living, which is constantly living in a stressful environment like unpredictable or harsh parenting can wear down the vagal tone over time. Even the absence of positive experiences can impact vagal development. It's like trying to grow a plant without water. The vagus nerve needs nourishing interactions to develop properly. Inconsistent or unavailable caregiving can also lead to difficulties in vagal regulation. The baby's nervous system literally learns to regulate or not based on the interactions with their caregivers. And what does low vagal tone do to us as adults? Well, difficulties reading social cues. If it's not functioning optimally, it's like trying to read emotions with blurry vision. It also brings on emotional regulation challenges because a less responsive vagus nerve can make it harder to calm down after getting upset, and this can lead to emotional volatility in relationships. Also brings in trust issues because if the nervous system is always on high alert, it's hard to feel safe, to be vulnerable, and to connect deeply with others. It also involves empathy struggles. The vagus nerve plays a role in our ability to resonate with others' emotions, and trauma can dampen this capacity, making emotional connections very challenging. It could also lead to physical touch sensitivity. Trauma could impact how touch is processed, potentially making it uncomfortable or overwhelming, which obviously will affect intimate relationships. How does this play out though in regards to attachment style or dark triad traits? Well, those with insecure attachment often have lower vagal tones, and this can manifest in a couple of ways. If you're anxiously attached, you might have an overactive sympathetic nervous system and a struggle to self-smooth. Basically, your vagus nerve is not hitting the brakes when it should on the stress response. So this often brings in a state of hyperarousal, constantly scanning for threats within your relationship. If you're an avoidant, you'll see a little bit of a different pattern here because the vagus nerve might be underactive in social situations, making it harder for them to feel safe and connected in close relationships. It's kind of like their connection circuitry isn't firing properly. Now, those that have narcissistic and antisocial traits, interestingly enough, often show a reduced vagal tone. Now, this could explain a few things because we have the empathy deficiency, which is lower vagal tone is also associated with that, and this ability to read emotional stress and states. So that would make sense of why they struggle with empathy. Emotional regulation, this could have that harder time calming down after narcissistic injury, and sometimes can lead to narcissistic rages. Also, lower vagal tone may contribute to hypersensitivity to criticism and this constant need for admiration due to stress sensitivity. On the more antisocial side, a reduced vagal brake on the sympathetic nervous system could explain their tendency towards risky behaviors because they have this sense of fearlessness. As I've already mentioned, low vagal tone is associated with reduced empathy and emotional resonance with others, which can influence that lack of remorse. Poor vagal regulation might play a role in difficulties in controlling impulses, which is a common trait with antisocial behaviors. It is important, though, to note that while vagal tone does play a role, that's probably not the whole story. I mean, there's other biological, psychological, environmental factors at play for sure when it comes to these higher levels of dark triad traits. But think of it as like the vagus nerve kind of like playing a piano that's out of tune, right? There's no point in learning to play if all the keys are not able to produce any harmony. But guess what? You can tune your central nervous system to be more in harmony. So sorry, you don't get to blame mom and dad anymore for not finding love. Unless you've gotten a frontal lobotomy, you can rewire your brain and vagus nerve through therapy. Neurolinguistic programming is one version of this, but I would highly also recommend that you check out polyvagal therapy, especially if you've tried other therapies but not seen much process. Now, you can also find a lot of videos on YouTube that will show exercises on how to improve your vagal tone, and I'm also going to include a book in the notes below that will teach you about some exercises, but I still recommend you seeking out a therapist that actually specializes in this. So, wrapping this all up, which I encourage you to do as well, the bottom line is that humans are wired for connection, romantically and intimately. Making those connections should be done in person, in a safe public place, and make sure that you limit your time on apps to avoid getting addicted to the swipe. If you meet somebody that your MCH genes like, give it a chance and forget about what you may be missing out on. Because even though I'm not asking you to believe in what I do, We are interconnected right down to the biological level. And so, you know what? If you meet that person, there may be more things at play here. If our genes know what's best, maybe it leads us to the person that we need versus the person that we think that we want. Get to know your body and what it's responding to. Learn to decide, are your choices being driven from your heart or your amygdala? Yes, it can be definitely scary to put your faith in someone, and do you risk getting hurt? Yep. And it fucking sucks. I know. But if love wasn't worth it, we wouldn't be programmed for it. You want the dating world to stop sucking? Back off the apps. Take chances, clear your trauma, and stop dating until you're truly ready for it. If you can't look in the mirror and love who you are, and I mean truly love who you are, not in a subconscious narcissistic way, then you aren't really truly ready to accept love. If you can't say that you're completely over your ex, then stop dating and give yourself time to heal. No one is going to be able to replace that for you. I didn't cover breakups in this because it's different for everyone on how long it takes to get over one. It really does depend on the situation. If you've dealt with abuse or recovering from a trauma bond, it can take years because that's clearing through a lot of layers. A normal breakup, I don't really know because studies really do vary on this. Some say 3 months, some say 6 months, some say 1.5 years, and some say 3 years if it was divorce. But I do think there is a difference between healing from your heart versus healing from your ego. Half the time, people aren't pining over an ex. They're pining over the desire for the ex to want them back. It's not about the ex. It's about feeling worthy and wanting to be loved. And how can you tell the difference? It's actually quite simple. Like, can you honestly say the relationship was everything you wanted in the first place? Were you faithful? Was your partner? Was there open communication? Honesty, mutual respect? If not, then your relationship wasn't truly secure, meaning it wasn't going to last anyways. So even if you were to get that back, you would find yourself right back in a new cycle. So do you truly want that back? No, you just want the validation. But I'm telling you right now, you don't truly need it. You will get that validation once you're healed and find somebody that you're truly meant to be with. And if you are partnered up, my advice for you is to actually fight for it. Don't run from the first challenge. Do not be on the apps unless you're in some kind of open relationship and your partner actually knows about it. Don't rely on porn to think you know what good sex is like. Get to know your partner's body and your own too. Don't be afraid to have that sex talk because I bet if you do, things will get a whole lot better and hotter. I personally think that in relationships, open communication is by far the most important thing because that comes with trust and mutual respect. But the second most is sexual compatibility. And whether you've been dating somebody for 2 weeks or 15 years, you should always make sure you are still making time between the sheets and keeping things fresh. If you don't know where to start, check out tantric sex because remember what I said about eye contact? Well, I'll let you explore that one on your own. Now, if you may have noticed, I did avoid discussing any astrological or human design talks in this discussion until now. I do want to mention that the reason I did this lesson is because of this shift in society and how we view relationships and how we connecting dating-wise and sexually actually lines up with the prediction in human design. Now, human design came out due to a prediction in 2027. Now, as I'm not a big fan of prophecies, this one is getting harder to deny. I'm going to be doing a live presentation on this on Sunday, July 14th with Awkwardly Zen, and I'm going to include the link below. And the video will also be posted here after if you are interested in learning more about this and where the direction of humanity may or may not be going. So until next time, guys, remember the key to finding lasting love and connection is to first love and connect with yourself. Embrace your authenticity, heal your past wounds, and approach relationships with an open heart and mind. By doing so, you open the door to the kind of love that can transform not only your own life, but those around you as well.